10 Reasons to Attend the Latin Mass. I'm here with Eric Sammons, the author of The Old Evangelization. And we were talking about the Latin Mass. We both attend the Latin Mass. And we said, why don't we come up with 10 reasons why people should attend the Latin Mass? And so he came up with 10, and I came up with 10. And then when we compared our lists, we were actually surprised that we really don't overlap that much. So I'm going to have Eric go first, and he's going to share his 10 reasons for attending the Latin Mass. And I'll jump in there too, and then vice versa. I'll share my 10 reasons, and you can jump in, and then we can just discuss particulars of the Latin Mass, maybe even give some advice towards the end for someone who's going to attend the Latin Mass for the first time, what to expect and how to prep. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think it's great that we came up with a completely divergent list, because it shows that people who go to Latin Mass were not all just the same people with the exact same reason for going.
Right.
And that's kind of the stereotype, is that we're all a bunch of, I don't know, nostalgic old bogeys or something. And that's really not the case. That if you go to a typical Latin Mass parish, you'll find lots of different types of people, a diverse congregation. And so I think that kind of blows the stereotype right away that the two of us have completely different lists.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty similar guys. And the fact that
Right.
we came up with different lists, I think speaks to the glories of the Latin Mass. I also like that you said that, because a lot of people wrongly believe that attending the Latin Mass is a form of protest.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
It's saying we don't like the Novus Ordo Missae. We don't like it, so we're doing this in protest.
Right. Instead of choosing to go to the Latin Mass, you're choosing not to go
Exactly.
to the ordinary form.
You're
of the
saying,
Mass.
I don't like this. And
Right, exactly.
I think for both of us, that was not on either of our lists. That's
No,
not why
correct.
we attend the Latin Mass. So,
No, absolutely not.
all right, well, let's go ahead and get started. You can go from either, I don't know if yours are prioritized or not. Mine aren't. I just put down 10. So if you,
Mine are mostly just thrown down there. So I'll just go
Perfect.
through them as I have them.
Okay.
The first one is because it's countercultural. And, we said we don't go to it because it's not the Novus Ordo, but I do think there's a reason to go there, because our culture has become so anti-Catholic. So much for the now, the new, the fast, the efficient, the utilitarian. And the Latin Mass is none of those things.
No, it's
slow.
not a drive-through.
It's somewhat complex at times. It takes time to really understand it. All these things that go against our culture. And I think there's a great reason to go, because I think what can happen is, over time, when you live in a culture, you become like the culture, even if you don't want to. And if you're part of an anti-Catholic culture, when I say anti-Catholic, I don't even necessarily mean explicitly they hate the church, which the culture does. I mean more just like how you live is very anti-Catholic if you live like the culture. And so going to Latin Mass is a way to take yourself outside of the culture for a little while. And you don't see that as much when you go to an ordinary form Mass. A lot of times it's taken on a lot of the culture, this utilitarian idea, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. This idea, kind of get things over with quickly and make it as simple as possible. Like you have your instant coffee and you have your instant Mass.
Right.
And so I think that's a great reason. That's one first reason is it's countercultural. A second reason is that it uses the universal language of Latin. Now, yes, I'm very aware of the Eastern Catholic churches, and I love them. I think their liturgy is beautiful. But in the Western Church, the fact is that our language is Latin. Our language isn't English. It's not Spanish. It's not French or German or anything like that. It's Latin. And so being able to have a Mass that is celebrated using literally the exact same words throughout the Western world is a beautiful thing, because it connects you to those Catholics who are living in other parts of the Western world, particularly. And of course, it connects you, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, connects you with all Catholics throughout time who have gone to Mass. So I think that's a beautiful thing, because it gets in that universality of the church, that we are all one body. And I think it shows it in a conscious way. I think a lot of times people get to the point like, well, that's just a side issue. It's not really what's most important. Well, perhaps not, but I think these things work in our subconscious, that we know, okay, I go to Mass here, it's in Latin. I go to Mass in Germany, it's in Latin. I go to Mass in France, or whatever, it's in Latin. I think that's a thing.
It's universal.
It shows that the church is above nations.
And also from the point of view of doctrine and the change of language, in English, even, since I've been alive, the meaning of certain words do change.
Right.
Even in English, for example, the word worship did not necessarily mean adoratio or latria. So you can read old English works from like the 1600s, and they'll talk about the worship of the saints. Well, we don't show latria to the saints, but that term worship has modified over the centuries, and so it causes theological problems, especially when you're talking with non-Catholics.
Right, and
with
even
Latin,
what the word worship means to a non-Catholic. I mean, it means like a praise and worship service. Which,
exactly.
You know, it might be nice, maybe not, but it's not worship as we mean it when we're talking about the Mass.
Right, and so we don't have to recreate the collects, recreate the canon. I mean, even in our own time with vernacular liturgy, you know, it went from the Lord be with you and also with you.
Right.
Now to and with your spirit. Should it be, you know, shed for all or shed for many? You know, right. in the consecration. So we're having all these debates within just a few decades.
And sometimes these words are changed in the various languages in the vernacular for ideological reasons. And you see that with the for all and the for many.
Yes.
You know, the fact is the Latin is for many, and in Scripture says and for many. But of course, there's ideological reasons. The whole idea of everybody is saved.
Yeah, dare we hope.
Brought about saying, you know, for all. And so with the Latin, you know, being stuck with the language is actually a good thing, because the Catholic Church has historically always been very conservative in how it deals with doctrine. And so you don't want to be able to change things too easily. I mean, I know that's kind of crazy considering how the way things have been in the past maybe 50 years. But I mean, you look at the first century, one thing that Rome was known for, first millennium, sorry. One thing that Rome was known for is the fact it didn't change things. It kept things
right.
the way they were, because it felt like it had been given this beautiful deposit of faith, and it treated it as it was sacred. You know, we're not going to touch this because it's been handed on to us from Christ and the apostles. And the language helps solidify that. I know people would say it's ossification and all that, but really it helps us to maintain those traditions that have been handed on to us.
And ossifications can be good. You know, right. You're not going to have any dinosaur bones if there's no ossification. You know, we were able to have them because of that. It's preservative, and that's a good thing. Another thing I want to touch on with Latin is evangelism. You wrote the Old Evangelization. People argue, well, if it's in Latin, how are we going to draw people into the church? Because they don't know Latin and they're going to be lost or they're not going to be evangelized. You look in the history of the church, Ireland was evangelized by St. Patrick, who said Mass every single day in what language? Latin. No one in Ireland knew Latin, and yet St. Patrick brought the liturgy to Ireland in Latin. Same is true with the Germans and the Goths and long before there was French amongst the Franks. They were speaking a Germanic language. And it was really French came to them as a corruption of the liturgical language, which was Latin. So from Spain, all across Europe, Ireland, Scotland, all these places were evangelized, and the liturgy was in Latin, and they built a profound Catholic culture. It's
Absolutely.
possible.
One of the biggest misconceptions of evangelization is that we're supposed to make everything as easy as possible for people. But look at Jesus Christ, his model of evangelization, which is what I wrote about in my book, which is the fact that he didn't try to make things easy for people. He proclaimed the truth. And oftentimes people didn't understand. Like the great example, of course, is John 6, when he says, this is, the body, you must eat my flesh in order to have eternal life. Well, somebody says that, you sound like a crazy person. And people thought he was a crazy person. They left. But he didn't say, oh, wait a minute, let's make it easy for you.
Right. What I really meant to say was,
Yeah. And so the same thing with using something like Latin, that, it turns people off, it's hard or something like that. Being hard does not necessarily mean it's anti-evangelization. In fact, sometimes what it does, it draws people into the mystery and it piques their curiosity. Like, hey, I want to learn more about this. And so they dive into it. When it's easy, well, then it's like, it's not valuable either.
Yeah. Taco Bell's easy.
Yeah, right. Not on my stomach, though.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay, so go with the next one.
Okay, the next one is what I like to call all the extras of the Mass that you find in the Latin Mass that you don't find in the new Mass. That, yes, it could be possible in the new Mass, but they're really never really done. And I'm talking about things like the fact that the altar boy has the paten under when you're receiving communion on the tongue. You have to receive communion on the tongue. The fact that you have that everybody, the priests and the altar servers, they bow their head at the name of Jesus, at the name of Mary, when the Blessed Trinity is invoked. Sacred music, sacred architecture, all these things are part and parcel of the Latin Mass. And all of them are, quote unquote, unnecessary to the Latin Mass, and they could be done in the new Mass, but they're not. And I do think they all those extras, they all point to the sacred. They all point to how important it's. Like I have a number of young children. And so like when my daughter received First Communion about a year ago, just the idea that when she receives First Communion, she sees that patent under her chin, and she's like, well, why is he doing that? In fact, her brother, my son, was the altar boy doing it. And he's like, why is Peter doing that? And it's like, because what would happen if something horrible happened and the priest dropped the host or it fell out of your mouth? Well, he can catch it so that the sacred body. And now all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, this really isn't bread. Yes. Because if it was bread, you wouldn't care about something like the patent.
Yeah, when you're eating your dinner roll at night, your mom doesn't come in with a patent underneath your chin in case you drop it. If it falls on the floor, it falls on the floor.
Sweep it up. Yeah. That's right. You let the dog eat it. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Things like bowing the head. One of the things I just love about the Latin Mass is the bowing of the head at the name of Jesus and Our Lady.
And you see the priest take off the biretta at the name of Jesus. It's just a reminder. This is a holy name. This is the name by which we are saved. It's
a way of being combating the vulgarity we see in society, that the name of Jesus is often used as a curse word even. And so by doing this, it kind of reminds us this name is holy. And, you think about the Middle Ages with the devotion to the holy name. And that's what we're trying to do here. And things like that are all, like I said, the extras, but I really think they do all these things subconsciously and consciously to bring us into the sense of the sacred, which is what the Mass is. It's sacred. And you just don't see that in most instances of celebrating the ordinary form of the Mass.
It's interesting that all of those things tended to fade away, not everywhere, but 90% of everywhere, went away when we got off of Latin. And follow me with this. Latin is a veil, right? It provides a certain transcendence. It's a different language than the one we're using every day at the grocery store, at home, or on the way to church. It's a sacred tongue. And when you remove that raises the question, well, why have altar rails and separate the nave from the sanctuary? Right? If we're all going to speak, if the sanctuary is going to speak English and we're going to speak English, well, there's kind of this new openness between the sanctuary and the nave, right? Linguistically. So yeah, we should get rid of those altar rails because that shows a barrier. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of, only ordained men or altar servers in the sanctuary. Let's bring in, lay readers, lay Eucharistic ministers, altar girls. Let's bring them all up front. So these liturgical barriers or boundaries is probably a better word, that were innate in the old liturgy and were also signified in the linguistic border or barrier. Right. All that stuff gets blown away. So yeah, if you're going to have a common vulgar language, then everything is going to be common. And you're going to have to move the altar out so people can be around it. Maybe build the church in a round, have the priest face the people. I mean, it all kind of cascades into a landslide when you begin to chip away at these things. So it's not an accident in history that when you take away Latin, all the other, what you're calling the extras, crumble up.
Right. And, it reminds me, I'm sure you've probably been to these, you go to like a business conference at a hotel conference room. That's kind of the feeling you get at a lot of parishes today. Mm-hmm. It's just completely profane and there's just no sacredness to it. And I think you're right. The taking away the Latin does then all of a sudden, I think the boundary, like you said, take that away. And now all of a sudden all the boundaries go away until you're, like I said, you're at a hotel conference room now, just listening to a speaker. Right. And that's so much not what the Mass is. So yeah, I think it's not a coincidence that those two are connected. The loss of both of those are connected. So, okay. The next one I have might be a little bit odd for some people is the clear gender distinctions that you find in the Latin Mass. As most people know, we live in a time of great gender confusion. Men saying they're women, women saying they're men, people saying that men and women aren't different in any way. I saw someone on Twitter recently say that a transsexual woman, I guess it'd be a man who says he's a woman, is literally identical to a biological woman. And somebody noted, can they get what was it they say? Can they get breast cancer, or not breast cancer, but it was like uterine, some type of uterine cancer, something like that. It's like, obviously they're not identical, but there's this confusion now between men and women. Well, with the Latin Mass, like you mentioned, only an ordained priest or clergy, a deacon as well, or altar boys, and only altar boys, not altar girls, can enter into the sanctuary. Mm-hmm. And I know that for modern ears, that just screams of sexism and all these terrible things. But I think what it does is it shows that there is a difference. It shows very visually to people children who grow up in the parish, who go to that Mass, and even adults who go, that there is a difference between men and women. Not that one is better than the other, but one has roles that the other one doesn't have, and vice versa. No man is going to carry a child and have one of the, probably the greatest natural blessing that somebody could give, which is carrying a child, being involved in the birth of a child, like a woman can. But likewise, a woman can't be a priest. And so we've seen that completely, the delineation, the distinction between men and women disappear in society. But when you go to Latin Mass, it's obvious men and women are different. And that's a beautiful thing. We glory in the differences. Yeah. I mean, it's a great thing. So I think that's something, and you don't have to have women as Eucharistic ministers and altar servers and all that in the new Mass, but we all know that 98% of the time, that's exactly what's happened. And I think it goes back to your point of, once we kind of separated the boundary, we got rid of the boundaries, there were no boundaries anymore. And so, and of course we know there's a big push then that happened for women priests as well, which can't happen, but everything up to that can and has happened. And so I think the clear gender distinctions of the Latin Mass are a beautiful thing and a reason to go.
Yeah, I mean, if your grandmother's up there distributing Holy Communion, and your mother's up there reading the epistle, and your sister's up there as the altar server, it does beg the question, well, why can't also the priest be a woman, or at least the deacon? And we hear this all the time in the Catholic Church. The answer is, when the priest says, this is my body, he's not talking about Father Bob's body, or Monsignor McGillicuddy's body. He's talking about my, as in Jesus Christ. He's in persona Christi. And bodies come in two ways, female bodies and male bodies. And Jesus had a male body. So the people who are in persona Christi saying the words of consecration, my body, have to be males.
Honestly, I usually, when I hear a woman, especially a younger woman, say, she wants to be a priest, and think women should be priests, but she's grown up in the Catholic Church for the past 50 years. My first reaction is actually feel sorry for her, because I understand that she has been told subconsciously that there's no difference. And so she has actually taken what has happened over the past 50 years to its logical conclusion. And so in a sense, I don't even blame her per se. I note where she's wrong, but I don't blame her, because she's just doing what she's kind of been told subconsciously. And so that's why when you go to Latin Mass, it wouldn't even cross your mind that a woman should be celebrating the Mass. It should be the priest up there, because there's only men up there at the altar, and so it's a very masculine. And also kind of a side point of this is that the Latin Mass is much more attractive to men than the new Mass is in general.
Very much.
And I know, like, my own story is my son. We went to just a regular parish when we lived in Maryland. We moved to Florida. And we started going to a Latin Mass parish down there. And my son, I think he was 8 or 9 at the time. Well, he had showed no interest whatsoever. He had received First Communion like maybe a year before. He had showed no interest in altar serving at all at our old parish. As soon as we started going to this Latin Mass parish, literally within a couple months, he was paying attention more closely, and he was saying, "Can I be an altar boy?" Because he was so attracted to those young men up there being somewhat militaristic, which is attractive to a young boy.
Right turns.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Doing everything precisely and all that. And now, he was only 8 or 9 years old when he first started. He wasn't always that great at it, but he wanted to be. And now, he's 15. He still does it. He still loves serving the Mass and everything. And I really do think he wouldn't have been as attracted to it if not for the fact that we were going to a Latin Mass. I think that's really what he realized. Okay, this is a manly activity that I want to be part of, which, again, perhaps in some places where it's celebrated wouldn't be a problem of the new Mass, but in a lot of places, it's been very feminized, and to a point where men are literally turned away almost from it. They have no interest in it. So, which is an anti-evangelization method. And we see that just in the numbers of women and men who go to Mass these days.
Yeah, it's demographic. Another thing people miss is, why do we have altar boys, Eric? And the answer is really simple. The idea of altar boys is relatively new. It's really around the Council of Trent that we see the idea of altar boys. Prior to that, it was primarily staffed by older young men and men who were in minor orders. But having younger boys who are not in minor orders around the altar comes around 1500s. The only reason we do it, Eric, the only reason is for vocations.
Yeah.
The priest does not need a 12-year-old boy to pour water on his hands or to hold a book for him.
Right.
You and I do jobs all the time where I have to wash my hands, open up a file, bring out a book, move something from one side of the desk to the other side of the desk. These are operations that grown men can do very easily.
Right.
I don't need and little kids don't even do it that great sometimes. I mean, they're trained, but sometimes there's little problems in it. The only reason we tolerate young men around the altar doing these menial jobs, right, that are not that important around the priest is one reason and one reason only: to acquaint them with the sanctuary and the role of the priest and to inspire vocations in those men. Right. It is the farm team for the priesthood. That's why there's altar boys, and that's the only reason there are altar boys. So when we put women, young girls in it, we're screwing the whole thing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's silly because people say, well, a girl can do the job just as well as a boy. And that's true. Sometimes they can do it even better.
They usually do it better.
But that's not the point. Isn't for them to do, because the priest can do it even better.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think the clear gender distinctions, though, you find in the Latin Mass, I think are another reason to go. Okay, another reason is, I think this is my fifth one, is I would say it's wonderfully extravagant. It's wonderfully too much. In the 1960s, after Vatican II, there was a big push to simplify everything, to make everything, all the prayers more simple, all the actions, don't have as many actions, all these things kind of dumb it down, make it as simple as possible. And I think part of that was just a attraction to Protestantism, frankly. And I think part of it was this idea that it allows people to participate more because they know what's going on more, something like that. But again, the problem with that is it's directing the Mass towards the people instead of directing it towards God.
Right.
And is there anything too much for God? We are supposed to give everything. And it's like when if a child is going to give you a Christmas gift and he spends hours and hours, let's say he's drawing, he's making something, he's building something for his father for Christmas. He spends hours and hours and hours and he just pours everything into it and does all this crazy stuff that really isn't even necessary for whatever it is. Let's say he's building a table and he just makes it so extravagant. What dad is going to say, so that's a little too much. You really shouldn't have done it that extravagant. I'd rather something simple. Of course not. The dad is going to be so pleased with that love and devotion that the son showed. And that's what we do in the Mass, is we show this great devotion and by our extravagance, that there's nothing too much for God. We know even the most extravagant Mass in the world is like nothing compared to the greatness of God. But it's all that we can give. It's not a matter of what God earns or God does or anything like that. It's what we can do. We can give everything. And it's a reflection of, do we give our entire lives to God outside of Mass as well? And so I think I just like that extravagance of Latin Mass, the simplification of the Mass that happened from Paul VI in the wake of Vatican II. I think we lost a lot. We lost a lot of beauty and the importance of giving everything to God through that.
Yeah, I mean, an obvious example is the Kyrie. It used to be in the Latin Mass. It's ninefold. Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Christe eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison.
You said it too much.
I said it 9 times. It's like 3 times for the Father, 3 times for the Son, 3 times for the Holy Spirit. It's just triple Trinity. It's great, Well, in the new one, it's Kyrie eleison, and then it's designed not for extravagance, but for responses. Right. So the priest says it one time, and then the laity says it one time, and then the priest says, Christ have mercy, Christ, and then so you can see that they simplified it for the purpose of dialogue. So it goes from 9 to 6, right?
And really the priest, he's not speaking to us when he's saying Kyrie eleison.
People say, well, why does the priest have his back to us? I can't hear him as well. Well, he's not talking to you.
Right. He's
Sorry.
having a conversation.
He's not talking to you. Yeah. He's talking to God.
It'd be like being at a party and you're talking to your wife, but you're facing somebody else, the person behind you. It makes no sense. Who are you talking to? Yeah. And so in that case, he's talking to God. And so I love the extravagance, and I think it tells us something. It signals something, the importance of giving everything to God.
It reminds us we're not doing it the most simple way for our convenience. It kind of goes back to your first countercultural point. The audience here is not us. It's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. That's the audience.
It's wonderfully not utilitarian.
Yes.
Which is a beautiful thing. Okay, my next one is the connection that the Latin Mass gives you to history. We have, in the Latin Mass, we have a Mass that has been celebrated for a very long time, in its current form for centuries, for 500 years, and in basically this form for over a millennium. And yes, the new Mass is still the same structure that we find all the way back to Justin Martyr and, of course, apostolic times, yet the actual how it's celebrated, the connection between the Latin Mass today and the Latin Mass of St. Francis of Assisi's time, for example, wasn't identical, but it was very close to the same. And the same as, St. Ignatius of Loyola heard, St. Therese of Lisieux. And so it reminds us that our faith, our religion, our church is 2,000 years old, and we are connected to all these saints. And I think that we think of that things like, okay, what is the sense of the faithful about their belief in contraception or things like that? Well, really, what is the sense of the faithful? When you ask that question, what you're asking is, what is the sense of the faithful over 2,000 years and going into the future? Like Chesterton said, the tradition is the democracy of the dead. It allows them to speak their voice. Well, we will forget those people. We will forget the saints. We will forget not only the saints, but just like the average Catholic who's just struggling to make it through the day, make it through his life, but goes to the Latin Mass in the 1940s, for example. It's not that,
or in the 1320s,
or the 1320s,
or the 980s.
I mean, there was many people who were just schmoes like us. They weren't saints, but they were trying, and they were going to these masses, the same Mass that we're going to today. And I think it links us to them in a wonderful and beautiful way. And so I think that connection to history, reminding us that we're not Protestants. The typical Protestant view is, our worship service is going to be created by the pastor or the worship committee this week. Like, how are we going to do our service this week?
Right.
And it might have no connection to how we've celebrated, our service for the past, 100 years or however long the denomination is. But we're saying, no, we are bound to to worship God in the same way that our forefathers or foremothers did. And I think that's a great thing, and it's an important factor. And I think, yes, the basic structure of the new Mass is the same, but it was changed so much that I honestly, just ask this question. If St. Ignatius of Loyola showed up today and he went to a Latin Mass, then he went to your typical parish, which one would he feel comfortable in? Which one would he say, that's my Mass?
Yeah, if you said, which is the Catholic Church?
Right. If you ask him, one of these is Catholic Church, one of them maybe it is, it's obvious. And so I think it's something that's a beautiful thing, a reason to go. Okay, another one is the prayers in the Mass are simply more meaningful, they're deeper, and therefore they give us more graces. And one example this is an example, a very simple one, is the Confiteor. We've simplified the Confiteor now from what it used to be. And in the old Confiteor, we asked for the intercession of Saints Peter and Paul. It was funny when I first started going to Latin Mass, I didn't know that at all. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. We're actually invoking Peter and Paul.
That's right.
Well, in the new Mass, we don't ask them for their intercession to help us, to help us to be, to leave our sin
John
behind.
the Baptist. Mm-hmm.
John the Baptist. And so it's like, if you don't ask them, you don't receive the graces of asking them. You don't receive their intercession. It's not like you can get it just by default. You have to ask for it. And in the Latin Mass, we ask for things that we simply don't ask for in the new Mass. And so it's like, they're just objectively, you're missing out on graces because you're just not asking for them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great reason to go to Latin Mass, is because we're just asking for more and more graces. We're asking for the intercession of more saints. We're asking for an exorcism from the devil. All these different things that we do that are built into Latin Mass that we just don't do anymore.
Yeah.
I think gives us a great reason to go, because we need them. I need the intercession of Peter and Paul. And John the Baptist is actually my confirmation name.
Yeah.
I want his intercession. I want to ask for it at every
But if you don't ask for it,
right,
you don't get it. And we're not saying that the new Mass is invalid or doesn't give you the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. It's kind of like you have the diamond, and the diamond is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the eternal sacrifice once offered to the Father for all time, right? And you can take that diamond and you can place it in like a gold filigree band with all kinds of maybe other stones, rubies and sapphires surrounding it, right? But it's still the same diamond. Or you can just put it in a gold band. Same sacrifice, same merit, same everything. But one has been enhanced by what surrounds it. And in the new rite, things have been simplified and things have been removed. An obvious example is the Confiteor, and even more obvious is the offertory.
Right.
In the new one, blessed art you, O Lord God of all creation. Through your goodness we have this, so on and so forth. We all know it. But if you read the offertory prayers from the 1962 Missal, the priest is making the bread and the wine into holy things even before the consecration.
Right.
Like he is offering it and sacrificing it and sanctifying it and setting aside the bread and wine even before he gets to the canon. And there are specific prayers in which he's doing that and setting these elements aside and blessing them even before the consecration. In the new rite, we don't have that.
Right.
It's less. It's less.
I actually went to Eastern Catholic divine liturgies before I ever went to a Latin Mass. And I remember thinking at those, like, wow, these are some pretty cool prayers. I like these. I wish we had these. I wish we had prayers this deep, this rich in our Mass. And it wasn't until a couple years later when I actually went to a Latin Mass for the first time, I was like, oh, here's where they are.
Right.
And I saw, wow, we do have these prayers. They've just been removed from the new Mass. And it's like you said, it's not a matter of validity. It's not a 0 or 1 game. I'm an old computer programmer. It's not like a binary system where it's either valid or invalid.
Yeah.
It can be valid, but you can be asking for more graces. It's just like if you say the Our Father versus just your own prayer where you're just asking for something. Both of them are prayers to God, and both of them you will receive an answer and blessings. But one of them was made up by our Lord himself, and so therefore it's probably going to be more powerful because it's just it's a better prayer. It's the perfect prayer.
Yeah.
And it's the same here with the prayers in the Latin Mass are simply just objectively better prayers, and so you're receiving.
And they ask for more.
Yeah. And that's probably the most important part. They just simply ask for more. I think they're more beautiful, but just the very objective fact they ask for more. And our Lord wants us to ask. He says, ask you will receive. Knock and the door shall be open. He wants us to ask for as much as we can. And the Latin Mass takes him at his word and says, you've told us to ask for all this stuff. We're going to ask for it all.
Yep.
And we're going to trust that you're going to give it to us. So, I think that's a beautiful reason to go as well.
Yeah. And for priests, you look at the prayers that are just the priest that they say in secret, preparing to receive communion. And you're like, wow, man, if I were a Catholic priest, I would want to be able to say those prayers every time, but they're removed or modified in the new Mass. So, priests are not asking for what priests have asked for centuries because they're just removed from the book. And I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense to me why, the priest's vocation is so important and he needs to be prepared, even more so to receive the body and blood of Jesus in the holy sacrifice because he's in persona Christi. It just, I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense why you would cut those out or change them.
And it really also, I think, if you look at those prayers, they really give a sense to the priest of humility that he realizes this is an awesome thing I am asked to do, and I am so unworthy of it, it's not even funny.
Yes.
And that's a good thing to have. It's a good attitude to have. It's no longer their show, but instead it's like, wow, I am an unworthy servant.
Yes.
And I need to beg prayers from God in order to be worthy to celebrate this sacrifice of the Mass.
Absolutely.
So, okay, and next one is, I think we're on number 8, yes, for me, is reverence, just a built-in reverence. Reverence, of course, it can be a subjective thing. I can be more reverent than the person next to me at any Mass, depending on how I participate in my own mind and how I prepare for it ahead of time and all of those things. But the fact is that there's a greater built-in reverence in the Latin Mass. And it's somewhat what we've talked about already, the fact that you have all of the extras, the extra prayers and all of these different things that you have gives it an extra reverence. But I just think the fact of all these things, reverence is needed so much today. And I remember one time I was at as a daily Mass, it was just a regular parish and everything. And somehow we're going to light, the deacon was going to light the candles, and the lighter was just not working. We had no way to light them. And so instead of saying, okay, I'm going to go try to find a lighter, he's just like, well, God doesn't care. He's still going to listen to us, something like that. Yes, that's true. But at the same, that God will still listen to you. Even
I would disagree with God doesn't care. Whenever I hear that, I said God cares about everything. Right.
Yeah. Good point. But God doesn't. He also said God will still hear us, and that's true. He will still hear us even without candles lit. But the fact is, again, it's not a matter of God's perspective, it's our perspective. Are we giving everything? Are we being completely reverent to God? And it wouldn't have been that hard to go find a lighter to light these candles. We can wait, and we have Mass start 5 minutes late if necessary. It's not that hard. And it's just the whole attitude of this is just a human endeavor. Whereas the Latin Mass, you really don't get that feeling. You get a feeling of this is a divine endeavor that we're just fortunate enough to participate in, that we're being allowed to participate in because of the built-in reverence of everything. I mean, okay, another example is how the priest puts his fingers together after the consecration. And that's just something, it's just something that you don't see. It's not required in the new Mass. You don't see priests doing it. But it's just another signal to you that, okay, this isn't bread that he's working with.
He might have one crumb on his thumb, and that is the entirety of Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And so he's going to keep the digits together so that crumb doesn't fall onto the carpet or onto the rug or the marble and be stepped on by an altar boy.
I mean, the great story of St. Isaac Jogues, that he lost his fingers.
They cut him off.
They cut him off because, as the Native Americans cut them off when he was preaching to them. And so, of course, he wasn't allowed to, I say, of course, but today we wouldn't realize it's of course. He wasn't allowed to celebrate Mass because he didn't have the fingers to do it.
Sacred digits, they call them.
The sacred digits. And don't you think today something like that happened? People would say, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. Now, of course, the Pope, I can't remember which Pope it was at the time, but he said, how could we deny being able to offer the sacrifice of Christ, somebody who made this sacrifice? And so, of course, he was given a papal dispensation, but he needed the papal dispensation.
He applied for it.
Yes, he applied for it. He couldn't just do it on his own. But that shows the reverence of what it is that he is handling. He knew, St. Isaac Jogues knew, this isn't ordinary bread. This is the literal creator of the universe that I am holding here. And so I need to treat it as such. So that built-in reverence you see in the Latin Mass is just unparalleled. And I think that's a beautiful reason to go, because we need more reverence in our...
Oh, for sure. Another one that's really obvious, Eric, is when you go to the Latin Mass and you get there 10 minutes early or you stay 10 minutes late, it's quiet.
Yeah.
It's quiet. People are praying. There's not people having conversations. People are on the kneelers and maybe they're lighting candles, but it's quiet. And that's, I think, the main difference when people first try the Latin Mass. They notice that just the tone and the sound and the posture of the place is sacred. It's like you come in there and you're like, I'm in the temple of God.
Right.
The tabernacle's there. He's not in another room somewhere. The altar is beautiful. Everything's appointed. There's candles. You can't come in and say, hey, what'd you shoot in your golf game yesterday? It's just not appropriate.
Right. It just makes you just feel it. You feel it. Walk in. Yeah.
And even if you're at, a small little church where they're having the Latin Mass, and maybe it's not a Gothic cathedral or Baroque or whatever, but the care that's put into having some statues of Our Lady and Joseph and the candles and making the best altar possible and arranging everything with symmetry, it's glorious.
I remember one time I went, when I hadn't been going to Latin Mass much, I went into a Latin Mass parish. I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to edit it for make it family friendly. But I thought to myself, man, these people really believe this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, this isn't just a game they're playing. This isn't a social club. They really believe this stuff. And it was just striking to me. I mean, I had practiced the Catholic faith for about 15 years at that point. But I hadn't experienced that, where you literally walk in and you feel that the people there really are there to worship God. Mm-hmm. And they're not that they're all saints. I mean, we're all sinners, and you can have some pretty outlandish people at a Latin Mass just like you can at a regular Mass. But when you're in that temple of God, you recognize, okay, this is the temple of God. And it's something that we don't see more, but you see that more classically in old days of Catholicism, where somebody could be a great sinner, but they still had a certain amount of reverence for the things of God. They realized, I remember this happened when I was a Protestant in college. A friend of a friend, he grew up Catholic, and he was living a college lifestyle, dissolute lifestyle, sleeping around, things like that. And I remember one time he was talking to my friend who was Catholic, who ended up being my sponsor coming to church. I remember I'm Protestant at this point. He said something about not receiving communion. He's like, well, I know I can't receive communion. I know what I do outside Mass. I can't receive communion. And there was a certain beauty that I know that's not the fullness.
There's a lot of great fiction based on that premise.
Right. But to me as a Protestant, there was a beauty in that he instinctively recognized the way he was living was wrong. And hopefully that would then lead him to repentance and changing his life, things like that. But at least he recognized he wasn't going to add on to his sin by receiving the Eucharist unworthily. And it was so odd to me as a Protestant. But I think that's something you see here with the Latin Mass, that you see that, yeah, people might be living bad lifestyle somewhat, but when they get in there, they know, okay, I'm in the presence of God. I can't mess around here.
You know, that reminds me of another great thing about the Latin Mass that I didn't put on my list and you didn't put on your list, and that is there isn't a huge pressure for everyone to go for communion.
Yes.
In the old Mass. True. And right. So you could have, the college student who, lived a desolate life the night before, but rolled out of bed and came to Mass, and he doesn't receive. But there's not the pressure of clearing out the pews and you have to go up, even if your arms crossed or whatever. There is the idea that not everyone receives communion. I was told a similar story. I was told that in the old days in France, I don't know what century this would be, but the earliest Mass, which would be like a 6 a.m. or a 5 a.m., that the prostitutes would attend. They wouldn't receive communion, but they would go to that Mass. They didn't want people to see who they were. Right. There was sort of a shame, but they also knew that they wanted to go to Mass, that they're living a bad life. They can't receive communion, but they also know that God is real.
And I think God honors those small steps that, we see that in the Gospels, of course.
Not that they would be saved per se, but again, there shows a certain amount of goodwill and maybe prevenient grace to bring them back into the life of sanctifying grace.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, the number 9 I have is ad orientem, which of course the new Mass can be celebrated ad orientem, but it's not, and it almost never is.
Yeah.
And I think that is, honestly, if you asked me, said, okay, what is one thing, you're only allowed to change one thing about how the Mass is celebrated today, the new Mass is celebrated today, and only one, that would be it. Yeah. I would say it would have to be celebrated ad orientem, because it gives a completely different character to the entire celebration of the liturgy, because no longer is it a dialogue between people. No longer is it a show by Father where he feels like this obligation to
smile, to show a winning smile. Yeah,
right, exactly, and try to be personable and all those things that might be important outside of Mass, but they have nothing to do with being at the Mass. And by turning himself to God, he basically is saying, I am leading you to the promised land. It'd be like Moses trying to cross, the Red Sea backwards or something, looking at the people, or trying to go, across the promised land without looking the direction he was going. And so I really think that part of the Latin Mass, it's unbelievable, I think, how different the entire feeling of a Mass becomes when the priest turns around. It's hard to describe until you go. I mean, once you go to a Mass, and of course, the Eastern liturgies, that's where I first experienced it myself, was when I went to Eastern Catholic parishes for their Divine Liturgy, and the priest was ad orientem, and I was thinking, wow, this really is different. I mean, I know I am at a worship service. I know I'm at a sacrifice as well. I know I'm at the sacrifice where he is offering up these gifts to the Father through the Son in the Holy Spirit. And your typical parish Mass today, though, he's just facing you. We're having a conversation, and maybe he's saying some great things. Who knows? But more often than not, it just becomes a human dialogue instead of a worship of God.
Yeah, and the liturgists in the 60s lied. They said, "Look, we found these early churches, and the altar is off the wall; it's freestanding, and that means that the priest was facing the people." That was what they taught everybody in the seminaries and in the conferences, liturgical conferences. Well, like you said, the Eastern churches have freestanding altars. They're off the wall.
Right.
But where does the priest stand?
Right. He's in between us and the people and the altar.
His back is to the people. So just because an altar is off the wall, a freestanding altar, doesn't mean that he was standing and facing the people. It's a false presumption. And that was the excuse used in the early 60s to promote versus populum celebration.
There's also something diabolical about the fact that there's such a resistance to ad orientem in the church, because there's nothing in the rubrics that say you can't do that. In fact, the rubrics kind of show that you're supposed to celebrate that way, because there's a few places where it says turn towards the people and say, whatever. Yeah. And it's like, but I tell you what, I've seen examples of a priest, young priests particularly, who decide to celebrate, even like a daily Mass, ad orientem, and the stink that's raised.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, the bishop jumps in usually quicker than you can imagine to shut that down quickly. And the way people get upset, and it's just like, I'm sorry, but I just feel like that's diabolical, because I don't know what else it could be, because really, from a human standpoint, why do you care? What is the big difference if he's facing you or facing towards the altar while he's saying these prayers? Because he still faces you when he's talking to you.
Yeah, he turns around.
And he's still, and when he's giving a homily, it's not like his back is to you, because then he's talking to you. And so the fact that there's such a deep resistance to that, I just think it's kind of scary.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Especially when you're in a church, a historical church, where there is a high altar against the wall. Right. And you have to use the silly IKEA table out in the transept. It's retarded. It doesn't match. Let the guy.
Oh, you're kind of looking at that altar like, oh, that's so beautiful. And here he is. It's like,
it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
And I know, knowing a number of young priests, they would love to do that. But they just are basically forbidden to do it. Maybe not explicitly, sometimes explicitly, but they just would never be allowed to do that. And I just think that's sad.
Yeah. Well, it says something about what bishops and monsignors and higher up priests think the liturgy is.
Right.
They think it's when all of it is 100% dialogue between them and the people, and it's not.
Right. And it's also the whole point is the focus is on the people, making them happy. And it's like that's not even a consideration in the worship of God. It's honoring God and worshiping him, not trying to make people feel comfortable or happy about it. So, okay. And then my final one is that the Latin Mass is the Mass of the saints. What I mean by that is we've had countless saints that have been nourished by the Mass, that have been converted through the Mass, that have received the graces they needed to be saints. Our goal in life, the reason we exist, is to be a saint, is to conform our lives to Christ. And it is proven over the centuries that the Latin Mass gives you the graces to do that. I mean, it's just time and time again. And so why would you mess with that? It's like, I just don't understand. We have, literally thousands of years, hundreds of years of this specific form, and even thousands of years of basically this form of the Mass that have been celebrated, that have created the great saints of St. Teresa of Avila, St. Francis of Assisi, St. Teresa of Lisieux. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on.
Yep.
And yet we decided, we think we can come up with, in 1969, let's come up with something better or something different. And it's like, I don't know why you'd ever mess with something that works. And so when we go to Latin Mass, we know we're going to the saints. This is somewhat like the connection to history, but this is more just the graces received to be saints, that we know we can receive them. It really, in a sense, being a saint is so intimidating, the idea of being a saint, because we're such sinners. And if we recognize how much of a sinner we are, we feel so separated from God. But when we go to Latin Mass, we tell ourselves, hey, those the canonized saints and all the saints who aren't canonized from before, they were no different than me. They just were open to the grace they receive at the Latin Mass. And so when we open up ourselves to that, I think it's a beautiful thing. And so that would be my number one reason you go, is because you want to be a saint. And this is a proven way to do it.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Those are 10 good reasons. Love it. All right. My 10 reasons aren't as good, but let's do them.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, it's great. There's probably like,
there's probably 100 reasons. Maybe we should do 100. We should do a book, 101 reasons.
Yeah, that's right.
We're already 10 into it. So the first one I had, and these are not in any order, but the first one I had is that children need beauty and truth. Children learn through what they see and what they experience, right? And the earliest catechesis that children receive is liturgical, being carried in their mother's arms into church, in those first 7 years up to Holy Communion. And if they see, jokes and, lots of lame announcements about muffins in the narthex, and interruptions and, Father making up his own parts of the Mass or his own prayers, whatever it is, they learn that this is not a reverence. It kind of goes back to your point about reverence. They're being catechized about who God is in the courts of our Lord, in the temple of the Lord. And when they go to the Latin Mass, I remember the first time we took our kids to the Latin Mass, the older ones were probably around 7, 5, and the bells and the incense and all the sensory elements of the Latin Mass. It's not just verbal. There's all these other elements, and the reverence and the altar servers and the procession and the sprinkling the holy water and the high Mass and all these things. It was teaching them about God. Even a couple weeks ago, I said this on another show recently. I think it was with Tim Gordon, but I said we were with I was with my 10-year-old, and Mass was over. We were kind of making a short Thanksgiving after Mass, And my 10-year-old leaned over. We were kneeling. And he goes, "Dad, our altar is so beautiful." And he's not a super pious guy, but he was making his Thanksgiving, and he was looking up there, and he was in touch with the beauty of holiness, as we read in the Psalms, the beauty of holiness. And these are the kind of things that the transcendence, the reverence, you just can't teach them out of a catechism, out of a booklet.
My oldest daughter is almost 22, and then my youngest is 3, so I have that range. And when we were first started having kids, my wife and I were very adamant we're going to go to an Orthodox parish in the sense that nothing the priest says is going to be heretical. Yeah. And that was very important to us. But we didn't really care about anything else. Like the music, the liturgy, all that was kind of not that big a deal to us as much as it was just we don't want to hear heresy.
Yeah.
As we continue to raise the children, though, we started to realize, both of us, each individually and together, we realized the importance of all these subconscious cues that are given in the Mass to remind the kids what's going on. The pedagogy of Catholic catechesis today is awful because things like abandoning the Baltimore Catechism, which is a whole different story, but just all the ways that a child learns at different ages of development, at 1 year old, 3 years old, 5 years old, 7, 12, it's not the same. And so what might be okay for an adult to go to a Mass that's maybe very basic, whatever, it teaches a 3-year-old a lot that we don't even realize. And so I that's a great point. And that's why I'll drive, we drive about a half hour to our parish, which is nothing compared to some people I know who go. But at the same time, we pass probably 5 or 6 parishes at least. Mm-hmm. And some of them are fine in the sense that they're not teaching heterodoxy or anything like that, but just it's because of the children, having my children be able to imbue this just through osmosis. All the stuff they learn by osmosis is so vital for them and their catechesis.
Absolutely. While you're speaking there, I was reminded that the first time I have twin daughters, they're now beautiful, they're 15, and I remember them when they were probably around 4 or 5, they had never seen altar servers. And I remember the priest coming in, and there was a girl crucifer. This is not the Latin Mass, obviously. A girl crucifer and 2 girls holding the torches coming in, and my little daughter tugging on my suit coat. And I went down, and she said, "Dad, I want to be a girl priest too."
Ouch.
I was so angry at that moment. It was like I just wanted to yell at someone or the priest. Like, I'm trying so hard to raise my kids to love Jesus, to be Catholic. And in her little mind, which is innocent and pure, she thought, wow, I too could lead the priest into the sanctuary.
Right.
And that means I too would be a priest. I want to be a priest too, Daddy. And I'm like, thanks a lot for confusing my daughter with basically transgender liturgicalism at a tender age. And that's the kind of thing that it's hard to unteach children.
It is because it seeps into them.
I know.
It's not words. It's all their other senses.
And they make conclusions that aren't always accurate. For example, at that age, I want to be a girl priest. She's wearing robes. Right. She's carrying cool stuff. She's walking with the priest. Wow. I want to be one of those too, a girl priest.
Yeah, because she's thinking, this person is close to Jesus up there.
Yeah.
Me too. And that's a good thought to have as a 5-year-old girl. It is a great
thought to have as a 5-year-old girl.
Which is why you don't want to mess it up by sending these mixed signals.
Precisely. So the one I put for number 1, not necessarily is if you have children, it's not just enough to catechize them with words. You have to catechize them in the cultus of sanctity, in the liturgics of it. So number 2, we need mystery and we need veiling. So like in the Latin Mass, we have these glorious tabernacles, jewels, and golden, but there's a veil over it. It's hidden. It's the same thing with Latin. We're not really worthy to see it or to understand it. Yeah, we catch glimpses of it when the priest opens it, but the priest is veiled because he's in persona Christi. He's wearing these veils on his body. We call them chasuble vestments. The women aren't required, but are generally wearing chapel veils because, they're sacred too. They're bringing in the new lives, like you mentioned in yours. It's kind of the distinction between male and female. is brought out here. And Latin veils, the priest facing the other way, the priest saying the canon in a whisper so that we can't hear it is veiling it. Having an altar rail is providing a veil. All these things it's being revealed to us and yet covered. And that's how our Lord, if you read the gospel, that's how he is. He tells parables, but doesn't always tell you exactly what they mean. Or later on, he explains it to you. There's something important about our existence as human persons and as Catholics that requires a mystery shrouding profound truths.
And it's like, it makes you think of the wedding veil of the bride.
Exactly.
That she is this mysterious creature for the groom. Mm-hmm. She is sacred in a very real sense. She is sacred. And it's this beautiful mystery that, in the way it should be done, the man has never really, it's not been revealed to him until after the wedding. Yeah. And it makes what happens after the wedding truly sacred.
Yeah.
And by having this veil, it reminds us that this is something beyond just a human thing. This is a divine relationship. And so the veils and the way we veil things in the Latin Mass is doing the same thing, that this is sacred. And then, in a sense, when we receive communion, it's like it's being revealed to us in a way that we're now entering into this sacred mystery in a very real way. But if we don't realize it's even a mystery ahead of time, then, it just kind of diminishes. It'd probably be too much to say. It's like, being with the bride before the wedding. But, right. It's somewhat, a similar analogy to that we're kind of desecrating, in a sense, this great mystery that exists.
And it's a sign of respect. Even when the priest has consecrated hands, but when he lifts up the monstrance or moves the Eucharist, he veils his hands.
Right.
And, his hands are holy, but the Eucharist is more holy.
Right.
And so, this whole idea of veiling, I think someone needs to write a book on it, like just the theology of veils. Even, apocalypse means in Greek unveiling. And so, even now in the age of the church, things are veiled from us, and they will be unveiled at the apocalypse.
Right.
When the wedding feast finally arrives and the veil comes off the bride. So that was my second one. The third one is not necessarily related to the liturgy of the Latin Mass, but in general, you have more opportunity for confession and better confessions. And what I mean is, like at our parish, there is confession running for 5 or 6 hours through the 4 Masses. Before the Masses, during the Masses, and after the Masses. And it's wonderful because, as parents, as busy people, not everyone can make it to the church from 4 o'clock to 4:30 on Saturday for confession.
Right.
Some of us are committing sins during the week, and some of us can't make that hour. And so the fact that there's always confession running, or maybe you're sitting in the pews and the priest delivers a great homily on sexual immorality or pornography, and it pricks a man's conscience. And he looks back and he sees the light on in the confessional, and he says, I need to be there. I can't receive communion. I'm in a state of mortal sin. I need to go get clean. He just casually, genuflex, walks to the back of church and either gets in line or goes into the confessional. 5 minutes later, he's clean and he's going to communion right then. It's awesome. And some people say, well, you shouldn't have 2 sacraments going on at the same time. Baloney. We've always done this. The Eastern Church does this. And John Paul II stated, where there's more than one priest in a parish, the second priest should be hearing confessions during the Eucharistic liturgy. John Paul II taught that. If you want the direct quote, go to my website, taylormarshall.com, and just put in John Paul II, confession during liturgy. The article will pop up with quotes from John Paul II. So I think that's a really important thing, especially as you have teenagers and older kids. I'm thinking, well, this is a father,
Right.
Your kid may not say on a Tuesday night, hey, can I go to confession? But you're always going to Mass together on a Sunday, and he may say, hey, Dad, like my kids say, hey, while you're getting to the pew, I'm going to go get in line for confession. All right, son, good.
Right.
No questions asked.
Exactly.
And we're getting to the epistle, and I look and I'm like, oh, here's number 2 in line for confession. He's about to make his confession. Great. Thank you, Lord.
And it's not a coincidence that a Latin Mass parish typically has more confessions available because, as you said, first of all, there's this sense of the sacred, and it naturally makes you hesitant to approach. And you should be hesitant to approach.
It goes back to the boundaries that we were talking about.
And so because there's this boundary, you're like, you're more cognizant if you're not, and we're never truly worthy, but you know what I mean? If you're in a state of mortal sin, it's kind of screaming to you, you shouldn't be coming up to receive communion. And so because of that, then there's a more demand for confession, and priests know this. And so, and of course, they're up there saying these prayers like we talked about earlier, that talk about their own unworthiness. And so they know they're unworthy. Their parishioners are too. We need to give them the opportunity to receive confession. And so, yeah, I don't think it's not just a happenstance that parish that celebrates the Latin Mass also has more times for confession.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the sacraments. We need it. And I just find that as a father of 8 kids, it's just easier to know that every Sunday we go, there's always the opportunity for a confession. I love it. I mean, that might be one of my number one reasons, just that in itself. So it's great. My next one is more time to pray. Sometimes I feel like when I go to like a Novus Ordo liturgy, there's always something going on. But in the Latin Mass, there's 2 parts in the liturgy in particular where I can actually get deeper into prayer. The first is the offertory, right? When the priest is preparing the altar, it's very quiet in the church. And sometimes there's some chant going on. If you're at a high Mass, low Mass, it can be very quiet. And that's an opportunity to prepare my heart and to examine my conscience and whatnot. And then the actual Roman canon, right? The Eucharistic Prayer, some people call it, is very quiet. The priest is just whispering it. And there's the bells that interrupt your prayer, and you look up and you see the host and the precious chalice. And that's also a great time of prayer. It's very climactic. It's just silence, and then breaking through the silence is the consecration. It's like the silence of Bethlehem, and then poof, like right. Boom, there is Jesus manifest to the nations. So it's just, even now, it's very dramatic, very powerful. And in the offertory and in the quiet of the Eucharistic prayer, I can think of myself with John or with Our Lady at the foot of the cross. I can pray for family members, pray for situations, pray for heartaches, pray for children. It's just, there's the opportunity to be still and to be contemplative.
And we should note that it's also, especially at first, can be disconcerting to the average person who has noise all around them. I know when I first started going to the Latin Mass for a few times, it kind of bothered me that I couldn't hear what the priest was saying. I was so used to always being able to hear it, but also I'm so used to always having noise around me. That's a little disconcerting, because now all of a sudden you're like with your own thoughts and you're thinking, okay, I'm at Mass, I should be praying, things like that. And so it does take a little bit of getting used to. And so if you haven't gone to the Latin Mass before and you first start going, you might find it's a little jarring. The silence almost like kind of hits you like, wait a minute, nobody's saying anything right now? I mean, it's all quiet here. What am I supposed to do? Yeah. Do I do something with my hands? Do I stand up? I mean, what do I do? And
what do I do with my hands? Yeah.
Exactly. Right. I need to pray is what you need to do. And you get the hang of it. But at first, it shows how, again, going back to my first one, which is countercultural.
Yes.
Where do we ever experience silence in our culture anymore? We just don't. And so it's a beautiful time to have that. It forces a certain silence on us.
And that was another lie of the liturgical movement, in that we need active participation. And what they meant was you need to be walking around the sanctuary or carrying something to be active. But that only applies, okay, you can multiply Eucharistic ministers to 15 and you can have a bunch more altar servers. But, at a certain level, only so many people can be active members of the liturgy, right?
Like everybody's up there.
Yeah, some priests I've seen invite everybody around the altar.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, they want to get active participation. Active participation does not mean that you're handling something, doing something, reading something. Active participation is defined by the Blessed Virgin Mary. There was no one more active in their participation with the crucified, dying Savior Jesus Christ than the Blessed Virgin Mary. He was in the passion. She was in the compassion, suffering with. And her pierced heart was united with his pierced heart. And she wasn't reading the Hebrew scriptures, and she wasn't carrying something, and she wasn't walking around. She was just there, I imagine, on her knees or somehow reverent, praying, offering, uniting her love in her heart for her innocence. She knew he was innocent, the Lamb of God, her Son of God. That is the highest form of participation. Anyone who says, no, it's not, is a liar. Mary participates in the sacrifice, and she said nothing. We don't have to do a bunch of stuff to be active in the liturgy.
It's also a beautiful thing for introverts.
Yeah,
A number of my kids are introverts, and I have a very deep respect for it. And I'm kind of introverted myself. And it can be really annoying how in the new Mass, you got to glad hand the people around you. Now it's like you got to welcome them beforehand. You got to say a piece where you do your whole like big hugs and kisses and everything. You have to make sure you're always singing and paying attention to everything. It's like, it's a lot of work. It's tiring to an introvert. And what can be beautiful though is you just sit there and you're with God and you're just focused on that. And so it really brings out that aspect of it and that contemplative aspect of our faith.
Yes. And I think that kind of goes into your point of it's the Mass of the Saints. To be alone with your thoughts during the consecration, it's wonderful.
Right.
All right. So my next one, number 5, is Gregorian Chant.
Oh, yes.
Even the Second Vatican Council says that Gregorian Chant is the normative music for the church, but yet it's all these 1970s Jesuit songs that are contemporary.
Martin Hagen, baby.
And they sound like B-rate, off-Broadway show tunes. It's horrific. And you know who finds them the most horrific, Eric? Is our teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
They think it is so lame. But you walk into a church with some Gregorian Chant, and teenagers are like, that's pretty cool. It's good. Yeah. It's authentic is what it is. It's perennial. And again, Gregorian Chant moves the heart. It changes us, but that doesn't mean we understand the lyrics per se. I mean, I understand a lot of it because I know Latin, but you don't have to know every single word in order to benefit spiritually.
Yeah, and the music, that's not only a subconscious thing. It's like you said with the children walking in, This is something that I think really impacts the children. If you're singing like a knockoff Simon and Garfunkel tune and just kind of like doing this thing, whatever, I mean, as you said, a teenager is going to be like, you got to be kidding me. What I love is how the gray heads think they're being like more relevant to the teens.
Oh, they're like, hey, Sonny, it's so hip that you're here. I'm cool.
But it's like the Gregorian Chant, it's like, we're not trying to be hip.
No.
We're not trying to be relevant. We're trying to worship God as best we can. And you need to get with the program. I mean, that's another thing with evangelization is we're not trying to be like you. We're trying to get you to be like our Lord.
Right.
And so the Gregorian Chant, in a sense, it's what it's doing. It's saying we're not trying to like condescend to your level and be like, be just like modern and relevant. We're saying this is something that's timeless. And like you say, you don't have to understand the words. Now, I will say, you go to Mass long enough, you start picking up all the
get it. You get it.
I mean, you understand what's going on basically.
Even my kids who take some Latin in school, they'll be like, "Oh, Dad, this says this." I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Cool."
Right.
Like they're getting it.
Right. My son, who served the Latin Mass now for, I guess, about 7 or 8 years now, I was just asking the other night, like, do you like he's taking Latin in school as well. We homeschool him, he's taking Latin. I said, does that help you? Do you know what's going on? He's like, actually, Dad, I kind of know what's going on already because I've been doing it for so long and I've seen the Missal. I was like, I know what it all means now. And he's not like some academic scholar, Latin scholar or anything. He just, you go to it long enough, you pay attention and you know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to serve the Spanish Mass for 10 years, you're going to know what's going on. Yeah.
Right.
Especially if you've been doing the Latin Mass your whole life. I mean, all these poor peasants in the 1100s, they didn't know anything going on, about their religion. They're just illiterate. Everything was distant from, no, they knew.
They knew exactly what's going on.
They knew. Next one is the 12 symbols of the Mass. So Thomas Aquinas in the Summa spends a really large chunk of time talking about liturgy and talking about the mysticism of the Mass. And most of the stuff he talks about is only in the Latin Mass because a lot of it's been removed in the new Mass. One example of that is, and I think I have a 2-part series on this in New St. Thomas Institute, newstthomas.com, but I think one of those lectures is for free on YouTube. So if you search it, Thomas Aquinas, I think it's called the Symbolism or the Mysticism of the Mass. For example, Thomas says, when the priest says, "The peace of the Lord be with you," he takes a piece of the host, consecrated, 3 times over the cross, says, "The peace of the Lord be always with you," in Latin, and then he drops the host into the chalice. Thomas Aquinas says this happens after the consecration, and it's the reuniting of the flesh of Jesus with the blood of Jesus, which signifies liturgically the resurrection of Christ. And the first words that Christ said to the apostles when he appeared to them on Easter Day that evening was, "Peace of the Lord be with you." Those were his words. And so that's just a really cool connection with the Gospels, with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and the liturgy. And it's 3 times because there's a 3-day separation between the death of Christ and the resurrection. And so Thomas goes through and talks about the purpose of incense. He says in the Latin Mass, the priest turns around and faces the people 5 times because in the canonical Gospels, Christ appears 5 times after the resurrection. So he makes all these mystical connections, which are really great. So check out that video on YouTube or newstthomas.com. And what's sad is I have so many students who watch those videos and they're like, well, I was at Mass last Sunday and I didn't see all that. It wasn't there. And I was like, well, you got to go to the Latin Mass or you're not going to, a lot of these things are now gone.
It really is amazing when you start to learn the Latin Mass that it's always been criticized in modern times, I should say. It's been criticized because it has all these extraneous actions and movements. And every single one of them means something. I mean, how they move, you have the epistle side where you read the epistle thing, you move over to the gospel side, represents, the Jews, and then moving over to the Gentiles and all, the preaching
that's
of the
another
gospel.
one is the epistle side in the gospel side represent the Jewish people and the Gentile people, and even the steps. And the subdeacon signifies, and the deacon signifies, and even the steps they stand on. And at the end, they come up equal, showing that the Jews and the Gentiles are now united in Christ, with who's the priest standing between them. All this amazing symbolism that guys like Thomas Aquinas, that was just part of the catechesis. Like that, every Dominican who went through his training knew that.
And it's not like you're going to know any of this stuff when you first go.
No.
And that's the whole point is you're not. The Mass isn't meant to be something. It's not like a movie where you need to follow it the first time you see it, or else you're not going to like it. A movie like Inception, which has all these different. I do too. It's one of my favorites. Well, you see it a bunch of times and you get more out of it each time. But the first time you see it, you do have to at least get something out of it, or else you'll never see it again. Right. They have to at least make it enjoyable for that reason. The Mass, though, the first time you go, you may not really get anything. But the whole point of the Mass is you don't go once, you go your whole life.
Right.
And so it really is this whole lifetime catechesis you're receiving. So most of the people at your typical Latin Mass don't know all these symbols you're talking about. However, you can learn them over time. You pick up one here or there. All of a sudden a priest might mention in a homily, like, oh, did you know, this? And I'll say, wow. And then the next time you go to Mass, you realize that. And that's something now that's part of your whole worship of God. And you see, and your catechesis of your children, and all those things. It's really a lifetime catechesis that the Latin Mass just has built into it.
Absolutely. And I like how you say it's not going to just hook you the first time. Just a couple of days ago, someone on Twitter said, hey, I took your advice. I went to Latin Mass and it was meh.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I responded to him yet, but I want to say, look, the Latin Mass is like beer or whiskey. The first time you try it, you may be like, how come people are into this? Right. I don't get it. But after you've had it 10 times, you're like, yeah, I really need a scotch or, Budweiser, cool. I like it, and it's the kind of thing that a lot of people maybe even initially offended by it. Like you were saying, like, I can't hear the priest. What's going on? Shouldn't I be doing something with my hands? But after a while, once you've done it 300 times, not doing it that way is really hard for me.
It is. And the funny story about the first time I ever went. I went to a low Mass on a Sunday. It was in Washington, D.C. I was living there at the time. And the Mass had literally been going on for about 10 minutes before I realized it had started. I didn't even know. Because the priest just kind of walked out low Mass. He was saying his prayers. It was just like very basic and stuff. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, oh, he's just getting ready for Mass. I'm like near the back. There's a lot of people there. And people are kneeling. And so I don't realize, you don't kneel at the beginning of the new Mass. So I'm just like, okay, they're all kneeling, praying before Mass. I'm just sitting there waiting. And it was literally about 10 minutes into it. I realized, oh, shoot. It's Mass. Because I think all of a sudden we got to the reading. I finally realized, people sat down. I'm like, oh, oops. So, it just shows that, first time you go, it's probably disrespectful to say meh, but I understand why you would say that.
Yes. And I want to talk about advice for people, but my advice for people the first time, they're always like, well, what ribbons do I use? And I'm like, don't even use the Missal the first time. Kneel there and just watch and listen. Like, don't even try to follow because you won't be able to, right? Just kind of take it all in your first time. And then after that, you can start to learn it.
Yeah, my best friend from high school is a Protestant, great Calvinist. He's a very strong Christian, great guy. And he was visiting me out of town. He and his whole family was, and I took him to the Latin Mass that we were going to. And I told him, I said, he's very much wants to follow along. And he's gone to Catholic Mass, the new Mass a lot. Yeah. Actually a decent amount for a Protestant. But I said, don't even try. Just sit there, just watch. Just kind of see what's going on, and you'll be fine. And afterwards, he was like, that was very different. I don't know if he thought it was good or bad, but he said that was very different than anything he was used to.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. My next one is silence before and after Mass. I kind of already mentioned that when you were going through yours. That's kind of self-explanatory. The next one is priest modify it less or not at all. So in the new Mass, the priest gets to pick which Eucharistic prayer, which penitential rite. A lot of things are up to his discretion. And I think that over time, that teaches the priest subconsciously, I'm the ruler of the liturgy. If I want to use Eucharistic Prayer 3, I can use Eucharistic Prayer. No one can tell me otherwise. If I want to reduce the penitential rite, or sometimes if I want to make up my own penitential rite, you hear this a lot in the Novus Ordo, for all, sins against our family during these holiday times, Lord have mercy. They make up things,
Right.
The power to choose options in the liturgy is a bad thing. The Latin Mass, the priest doesn't have any options. Now, he could choose like a votive of Our Lady on Saturday or something like that. But once you click the first domino and you start the Mass, there are 0 options. There are very strict rules. Even if you're going to commemorate something and add a collect, there's rules on how that's done. He doesn't get any discretion over the liturgy as a priest. He is there to serve. He's like a waiter at a fine restaurant, and the maitre d' and the manager says, hey, here's how you serve the food. You serve it from this side. Here's how you serve the drinks. Here's how you open the wine. Here's where you put the bottle. Here's where you put the silverware. And you don't mess it up, or you're out. And the priest is like that. He is a server for the Lord. No discretion, no changes, get it done.
And that's a good thing for the priest also, because it doesn't put him under any pressure.
Right.
Like now he has to perform something. He has to make sure he's picking the right prayers and saying the right spontaneous prayers or whatever to please the people.
Or he thinks if I don't do Eucharistic Prayer 2, the short one, people are going to complain that Mass takes too long. So I'll just do the short one.
Yeah, exactly.
It's too much pressure for him.
He has to, because it is on him.
It is.
Because he does have to decide. And so therefore the people legitimately go to him and say, why are you doing the long prayers and stuff like that? Let's make it shorter, Father. They might not say that, but they basically mean it when they walk out after communion or whatever. Whereas at the Latin Mass, it's like, this is my only option, is all I can do. And so it takes that pressure away from the priest and makes it a lot easier. Life, frankly, becomes easier for him because he just follows the book and he's done.
Yeah. Yeah, the priest is not accountable liturgically to the laity. It's kind of I never thought of it that way from the priest's point of view. He doesn't have to have moms come in and why don't you have altar girls, or why didn't you do it this way, or why don't you celebrate birthdays in the liturgy or wedding anniversaries in the liturgy anymore, or I have an announcement that I want to have next week. All that's off the table. He's like, sorry, I just follow like Father Z says, I read the black, I do the red. There's nothing else I can do about it.
I think it takes a tremendous pressure.
If I were a priest, I would want that all the way.
Yeah. He doesn't have to feel like he has to perform every Sunday.
Yeah. Like good morning, everyone. Today's the 19th Sunday of Ordinary Time, and we're going to learn today in the Gospel that, we got to love our neighbor. Like, you don't need that.
Yeah.
You just walk in, and like you said, you get it done.
Exactly.
Okay, the next one is related to that. The Roman canon is better than the other canons. So the Eucharistic Prayer 1 is called the Roman canon. It goes all the way back 1,500 years. And it is glorious. It is one of the greatest, I think calling it literature might be blasphemous, but it is one of the greatest written statements, prayers ever composed by men, maybe the greatest, the Roman canon. And from the Te Igitur all the way to the end, it's just it's really 12 prayers when you look at it. And it just keeps going. It just keeps going. And you got the prayers and the invocation of the saints. And that's another thing. In the Novus Ordo, you can do Eucharistic Prayer 1, but you can omit the saints' names. to save time. Oh my gosh, what a joke, right? You're like saving what, 15 seconds of everyone's time?
And you're losing the intercession of St. Lucy or somebody like that.
Right.
It's like, come on.
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
My daughter's name is Lucy, and she always loved it when they would mention Lucy, during when we went to an ordinary form mass. And it's like, why? And like when they skipped her when she knew they were doing the first Eucharistic Prayer 1, and they skipped her, it's like, what's up? That's my saint. I didn't get her intercession on this mass.
Yep. So the Roman canon is just superior. It is fantastic. I've read that at Vatican II, when it was suggested that they would bring in other canons, that this was one of the most scandalous things for the council fathers, for the bishops, that the Roman canon would become an option. I mean, it's the heart of the Roman rite.
But does the Roman canon mention the dewfall? Like Eucharistic Prayer?
Right, the dewfall. Yeah, the dewfall. So I just think, I mean, to put that aside is like taking your grandma's china and her silver that's been passed down for generations and saying, we'll maybe use that, but we also have, these other plates that are good too, and it's like you have the best. And
it's like you mentioned already, which one does almost every priest take almost every time? Two.
The short one.
Because
save time.
They're not picking it because it's more beautiful or it's deeper prayers or more than they're simply picking it for utilitarian reasons because it's shorter. And I don't know anything in the spiritual life that is better because it's shorter. You never take the easiest route in the spiritual life. So in your prayers, in your sacrifices, in your virtues, all those things, you always take what is right, even if it's almost always the harder thing. And so the idea is that we gave these options, but we really didn't give options. What we said was, here's a shorter one you can do now. Right. And that's basically what everybody takes.
And how interesting that it's the short one that's the most popular. It shows that we as humans, even we as Catholics, want to do it the easiest way. Yeah, and the Latin Mass says, no, you're not going to do it the easiest way.
You're going to say all these prayers whether you like it or not.
You are going to commemorate all these saints and ask for them to pray for you because you need it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's objectively a more beautiful prayer. And that's what struck me. Like I said, I went to the Eastern Catholic liturgies and I saw that. And then when I started going to Latin Mass and started following along in the Missal, and I was reading, I basically would just read the English side when I first started going. And it was amazing. I remember I went with a couple friends one time and we all did this and none of us had really been. I'd been maybe once or twice and they hadn't been before. And that's what we all said coming out was like, I can't believe how beautiful these prayers are. And like, here we are, some of them had been Catholic their whole life. I've been Catholic for over a decade, and we had no idea that there even existed these beautiful prayers in the Latin church that could be said. And I always think it's really a tragedy that this stuff has been hidden from your average Catholic. You just don't know.
Right. Well, people are figuring it out now.
Yes.
I think, and people are going to watch this and be like, I need to give this a shot. So, my last one, because we can just wrap it up here, because I want to give something that people like, okay, now you're going to go try it. But my last one is not really, again, connected with the liturgy per se, but better sermons. Now, let me just give a warning here. I have heard some really lame sermons at the Latin Mass, some real bad ones. So I'm not saying that the preaching is necessarily better in a Latin Mass parish than it is at Novus Ordo. But I would say, on par, it's several points better than what you're used to hearing. And the reason I think for that is there's less pressure on the priest to perform, and he just has the epistle and the gospel, and most of them are trained to hit on the epistle, hit on the gospel, maybe also within the liturgical cycle where we are, apply it and sit down. Would you agree with that?
I would say yes. And the way I would agree with it is I do think it's built into the lack of a need to perform.
Yes.
That what you do is you put pressure on priests, frankly, from the Protestants. They feel like they have to live up to this ideal of preaching that is very emotional, very feelings-based, very much has to get a rah-rah crowd going. There are times and places for that, but it's not really at the Mass.
Yeah.
Whereas at the typical priest who's celebrating the Latin Mass on a regular basis, or that's all he celebrates, for example, it's not even in his mind when he's up there, I need to perform. He's simply saying, okay, I'm worshiping God through the Mass, and I want to instruct the people in some point. And so it is much, to an outside observer, it might appear more boring. Let's be honest, because usually they're not trying to, tie your emotions and try to make it a performance. But if you're really there to be catechized, obviously to worship, be catechized during it, and you're listening, the depth of what is being said is typically, like you said on part. I mean, I've heard great, beautiful, deep homilies at the new Mass, and I've heard some stinkers at the Latin Mass. Yeah. But on a whole, I would agree that you just get a depth there that you really will help you then live out the Catholic faith, which is really what the purpose of the homily is just to help you take what you've heard in the epistle, the gospel, and apply it to your life.
Yep. Good. Well, there's 10 reasons to attend the Latin Mass, actually 10 times 2, 20. I don't know what we're going to call this. We're going to call this 10 reasons or 20 reasons. We'll have to figure that out.
Bonus is 10 more.
Yeah, 10.
Buy 10, get 10 free.
If you watch now, you'll get 10 more. So I'm sure right now there are thousands of people who will watch this or who have watched this. And they're like, okay, this is cool. I'm going to go drive 45 minutes and check this out. What is the advice that we would tell people? We already stated, look, your first time, it's going to be like beer or whiskey. It may not be super exciting. And also, don't try to follow along. There's going to be a lot of new things for you. What else?
I think one thing, in fact, I just had a friend who went to the Latin Mass for the first time just last week, and I was asking him about it. And the first thing I asked him was it a low Mass or was it a sung Mass? It could be obviously a Solemn High-Mass as well. Because I do think there's a big difference between the two in your experience of them.
Good point.
And I think if it's a low Mass that they're going to, they might not even know. But if just so people who don't know the difference, if it's a low Mass, there's really no singing involved, and it's usually relatively short. The biggest thing is there's no singing. And a sung Mass is going to have some type of singing. Usually has a choir with some beautiful.
And by singing, we mean chanting Gregorian chant.
Yes, no Marty Hogan, no David Haas or whatever his name is, anything like that. Exactly. Beautiful, actual singing as it's meant to be in liturgy. And so if you go to a low Mass particularly, just note that it's a whole different feel than what you're used to. There's no performance literally in it. I mean, at least with when you have the sung Mass, there's a performance in the sense you have your choir singing beautiful songs like that. Now, my friend, what he said was he watched the low Mass a number of times on YouTube. And that really helped him.
Interesting.
So the first time he went, he felt like, okay, he wasn't trying to follow every word or anything like that, but he's like, okay, I get what's going on here. I understand where we are.
See, I don't like that, Eric. I think your first time should be in there. I think you should. Well, if it's a low Mass, you wouldn't smell the incense. Maybe the residual incense. I don't know. I kind of feel I would hate if the first time I ever saw it was on YouTube. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's a valid point.
Yeah.
I think, though, the most important thing is don't try to think too much.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice.
You sit there and you let it wash over you. And you let everything about it wash over you, like what the priest is doing, the prayers are being said, what the altar boys, how they're moving around. Usually, not always, but a lot of times they'll be celebrated in a more beautiful church. Sometimes they can't help it. They just have to celebrate wherever they're allowed to celebrate it. And so you can experience that as well. But just don't try to think too much, because what happens is it really takes time. When we started going to a Latin Mass parish regularly, when we lived down in Florida, I would say it was probably about a year of going to it regularly before I felt like, okay, I'm not only experiencing this, I'm actually following along. I know what's going on the entire time. I would pick up pieces immediately, but just really where I was like, okay, I understand to a certain extent, I understand everything that's going on now. And actually what helped was when my son started serving, because he was like, I was helping him train for it. Like, oh, okay, that's cool. But I just think don't try to think too much. It's really, because really when we worship God, we do have a tendency to think it's our intellect that's worshiping God. And that's not true. It's not that our intellect is not involved, but it's our will. Yeah. And so you don't have to think it through a whole bunch. So I would say that. And also, I would give a challenge to anybody who, let's say, just goes to the Novus Ordo now. I would challenge you to go, if there's a Latin Mass who's nearby that's celebrated every Sunday, go for 3 months. Every Sunday for 3 months. And give it a shot and see. And after 3 months, I can almost guarantee that you'll continue going.
I agree with that.
And so,
it's like beer.
But I do think it takes, but it's going to take some time. You can't just go once and say, oh, okay. Because I actually did that. My first time I went, like I said, wasn't the best experience. And I didn't go again for a while. Mostly wasn't available to me, but I was just kind of like, it's not for me, is what I said. But that's because I didn't really understand what it was. And so really, that's why I think you have to go on a regular basis to really understand, not understand, but as much as really enter into it, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. That's great. I like that advice a lot. What would you say, there's the whole thing about veiling and chapel veils with women. That I think for female listeners, that could be kind of a scary thing. Like, do I have to do it? So I think we should talk about that. And then also bringing kids to the Latin Mass, especially if it's a low Mass, it's a different ball of wax. Now, some of them have cry rooms, which is great. But I have found in the Latin Mass, the idea that you come in and out with a child, or maybe that you're outside of the Mass, either in narthex or even outside the building, outside with the kids, is not a big deal. It's very there's a lot of kids, and if your kid's making a little noise, like, I don't know, I kind of feel like there's more pressure in the Novus Ordo parish just to like stay in there and fight it out. Whereas in the Latin Mass, you're like, Father's up there, he's got it under control, he's got the prayers going. I'm not necessary for this. I mean, I unite my will to it and unite my mind and my heart to the prayers, but baby needs a diaper change, or this child's crying or needs to go to the bathroom, and going in and out. It's kind of like the Eastern liturgies. People are walking around, they're lighting candles, they're going outside. You see some grandpa goes outside and smokes a cigarette, comes back. Like, there's sort of this there's a lot of movement going on. And in the Latin Mass, I feel as a parent, shuffling in and out with kids is not as big a deal. So that's a positive. And I would say if you go and you're at a low Mass, don't feel embarrassed if you have to leave with your kid. Everybody's going to be doing it.
And I want to address kind of an elephant in the room, and that is kind of the attitude, the stereotypical attitude people think Latin Mass goers have, which is very judgmental, very much you look down on people who don't go to the Latin Mass. And it's not to say there aren't people like that. I have met them.
Yes, there are people like that. Yeah.
But I do think that, first of all, I think the internet magnifies them. I think in real life, you don't see that anywhere near as much as you do on the internet, where you say something good about the new Mass on the internet, and all of a sudden you just get a deluge of people saying you're a heretic, you're awful, and all that. That's not what happens in real life.
No.
And because I know a family, they had young children, and their kids were a little rambunctious, and they would not come to our parish, even though they didn't really like going to the one they went to, because they were afraid of being judged and that people look at them funny if their kid was loud, like during the low Mass or something like that. I said, you don't get it. We don't care. Like, if your kid's screaming, it happens. You pick them up, you get them out, you calm them down, you come back in. It's like nobody's gonna care. Nobody's gonna judge you, because kids are just kids.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it also applies to the chapel veil of women. That I remember our priest, our pastor at the Latin Mass parish, was very good about this. He's like, if you specifically say to the regulars, it's like, if you judge some woman who comes in here because she doesn't have a chapel veil on, you got a real problem.
Yeah.
And it's an optional thing. It's a beautiful thing, and women can decide to do it. But if you don't feel comfortable doing it when you first are going, don't do it. You don't have to do it. It's not required. Learn about it, read about it, and prayerfully decide whether or not you're going to do it. But if somebody in the parish is looking at you because you don't have a veil on and you're a woman and judging you, that's their problem, not yours.
And you know what? Of being in Latin Mass circles for 10 years, I've never heard that or seen that.
Right.
With having wife and daughters, and who do sometimes my wife and daughters do, sometimes they don't. It's never been a problem.
Yeah. And so I think
I would not, if that's what you're afraid of, put that away. Don't even worry about it. Don't even make that an issue your first 5 to 10 times you attend. Just get there. I
do think, though, people are intimidated that they're going to do something wrong and people around them are going to judge them. That has not been my experience. And honestly, here's what I always do. When I first started going to Eastern Catholic liturgies and first started going to Latin Mass, I sit about 3/4 in the back, and I find one person, maybe a little bit up, who I know is that I can tell. You can always tell the one who really knows what they're doing. And I just watch them and I follow them.
Yeah.
And when they stand, I stand. When they sit, I sit. When they kneel, I kneel.
Yeah.
And especially in the Eastern liturgy, you never know what the heck's going on.
Right.
And so you have to do that. And I find just practically that can help you. You won't feel self-conscious, and you can kind of pay attention when you just kind of have your eye on that person, having somebody in the line of sight, so to speak. Right. And just that person, just when they do what they do, and you'll be fine. And you don't have to. Then again, it's part of this not thinking part of it. Don't.
Yeah, it's like if you pay for a ticket to go to Italian opera, do not bring the translation with you and try to follow what the fat lady is singing, right? Like,
right.
Sit there, let the emotions and the music sweep over you and just take it all in. Once you become a veteran opera attender, you can get into the lyrics and the storyline, the plot and all that. But the first few times, you just need to experience it. Right. So one last question we'll fold up here, Eric. Should they go to a low mass or a high mass or sung mass first? I'm going to say, ideally, you should go to a sung mass.
That's going to be my decision as well, because what happened to me when I went to a low mass first, I don't really know what's going on, but what got me to think about it again is the diocese had actually it was a Solemn High-Mass.
Which is even better.
And it was for the Feast of the Presentation, Candlemas, and I was so blown away by it. I mean, I'm talking blown away because this was the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., and they had a ton of seminarians up there, and like just every one of them bowing their head every time the priest would say Jesus, all this stuff I was just like, this is unbelievable. It blew me away so much. And it was like drinking from a fire hose. I got a tiny bit of it.
Yes.
But yet it made me thirsty for more. And so a sung mass, you're not, just for people who don't know, a Solemn High-Mass is usually only on a solemn, like holy day, like the Feast of the Immaculate Conception.
And you'll see a priest, a deacon, and a subdeacon.
Right.
Everything is chanted, incense, holy water. It's through the roof.
Right.
Ideally, that's what you want for your first one.
Right, because you'll be blown away.
Yeah, below that is a sung mass, and that's a priest without a deacon, without a subdeacon, and there's chanting, and there's incense, and there's holy water at the beginning, but it's not as solemn, and you don't have the deacon, the subdeacon flanking them. And then there's a low mass, which is just the priest, no music, no incense, no holy water, and the people don't usually respond.
Right.
It's very quiet, and like Eric was saying, he didn't even know the mass had started. And that is the most foreign experience in the Latin Mass. The most austere and quiet and mysterious and hard to follow is the low Mass, which is the most available.
Right, because to do a sung mass, you need a choir. Typically, you need more altar servers, and so you might just not have the resources. A parish might not have the resources to do that, and so they do a low mass, which is you only need a priest. You don't actually you have an altar. Usually, have one altar server. You don't even need the one altar server, but typically you have one. Usually, oftentimes a man will just go ahead and be the altar server for it. But I would also recommend, if you have the opportunity, go to a sung mass first, because you'll just experience more, and you'll kind of see more of the height of it. Like the Solemn High-Mass is the really. I actually went to a pontifical high mass a couple of months ago, and that was just, and that for people to know, the bishop celebrates it, and it's when you talk about bells and smells and bells and all the bells and whistles, this was it for that, and it was wonderful. So just go the highest form you can if you can. But if all the offers a low mass, I still would say it might take longer for you to appreciate it. But I do think if you give it, like I said, that 3-month time frame, I do think you will realize there's a depth to it that just simply isn't there with your typical ordinary form Mass.
Excellent. Well stated. Agree 100%.
Awesome.
All right. Yes. Well, hey, if you like these videos, please like it. Please subscribe. Please hit the notification bell, and you'll be notified for future ones. And you can follow Eric at his channel, which is called Swimming Upstream. We'll put a link there in the show notes. You can go over there, subscribe to his channel as well. Also, he's the author of the book Old Evangelization. So if you want to get old school, not only with the Latin Mass, but with evangelization, check out his book, Old Evangelization. Thanks so much, Eric. This was great.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tyler.
All right, God bless. Signing off.
God bless you.